Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I'm Austin Westfall. We want to continue our coverage of the bridge collapse in Baltimore, but first, we want to also talk about a bridge disaster that took place further down south. The bridge collapse in Baltimore on Tuesday morning was an eerie reminder of another bridge disaster that happened 4 decades ago in Florida. I'm talking about the deadly 1980 Sunshine Skyway Bridge disaster in Tampa Bay. Let's discuss some of the lessons learned from that incident with Mark Luther, who is the director of the Center for Maritime and Port Studies at the University of South Florida. Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So let's start surface level here. Let's just draw the comparison between what happened in the Tampa Bay area versus what happened in Baltimore this week. Are they similar?
They have some similarities. A ship knocked a bridge down. The bridges are of somewhat similar construction. The similarities kind of end there because in the Tampa Bay incident in 1980, it was a severe weather event that blinded the pilot of the vessel and pushed the ship out of the main ship channel into one of the main supports of the center span of the bridge. And then that center span collapsed, much the way the Key Bridge did. That was a much smaller vessel. It was about a 34,000 gross ton vessel, dead weight, whereas the Dali that hit the Key Bridge was, I think, something like 114,000 gross tons, so 4 times the size of the Summit Venture, the ship that knocked down the Sunshine Skyway Bridge.
The Sunshine Skyway Bridge, was it repaired after this took place, or did they build a completely new bridge? Did they work off of what was left standing of that bridge? How did they repair?
They completely built an entirely new bridge. In fact, the approaches to the old bridge are now a fishing pier, but they started from scratch and built a completely new bridge with a lot of safety measures built in to make such a catastrophe in the future highly unlikely.
Let's talk about some of the safety measures that are in place in ports around the country. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation out there right now as investigators comb through what exactly took place in Baltimore. There are still a lot of questions we don't have the answers to. But in general, Mark, what redundancies are in place, what safety measures are in place at ports to make sure that ships don't get in any kind of collisions?
It's highly variable from port to port. That's sort of the study, the joke in port studies. Once you've seen one port, you've seen one port. For bridges in particular, it depends on the age of the bridge. The Key Bridge was built in the mid-'70s, several years before the Sunshine Skyway Bridge disaster. So it didn't have a lot of the features that the new Skyway Bridge does. Large rock piles around the main supports to keep vessels away, and large cylindrical buffers called dolphins to deflect vessels that are heading towards those main support structures. But there are lots of other technological things to help keep ships safe. I run what's called the NOAA Physical Oceanographic Real-Time System, or PORTS for short, here in Tampa Bay since the early 90s. That's a network of sensors that measure winds and waves and currents and tides, fog, things like that. They can give harbor pilots, the men and women that guide vessels in and out of ports and harbors, advanced knowledge of, is there bad weather ahead? Is there a fog bank rolling in? Are the waves too high to safely bring a vessel through a certain part of the ship channel? Or are the tides high enough that the vessel is not going to run aground as it comes in parts of the shipping channel? So that's something that was instituted in large part in response to the Skyway Bridge disaster in 1980.
To your knowledge, are those sensors present in Baltimore?
They are. We were the first such site in the country, but now there are 38 ports around the U.S. that have the same type of system in it, all run by the NOAA National Ocean Service. Baltimore is part of the Northern Chesapeake branch of this Physical Oceanographic Real-Time, or PORTS network. There are actually wind sensors and what we call an air gap sensor on the Key Bridge. The wind sensor was up at the top of one of the piers. The air gap sensor measures the distance between the bottom of the bridge and the water so that vessels know how much vertical clearance they're going to have as they go under the bridge.
What would have to go wrong? And I don't want to speculate too much because there's obviously, as we mentioned, there's still a lot to learn about the situation in Baltimore. But I just want to ask from a surface level perspective, what can you think of that can go wrong in order for these types of sensors and other mechanisms that are in place to keep these harbors safe? What can go wrong in order for a large ship of this size to hit a significant, to hit a bridge and to cause such a catastrophe?
The most likely scenario, and most likely what happened in this case, again, don't want to speculate, but there was a massive mechanical failure of some type that leads to loss of power, loss of steerage. In all of the videos I've seen of this, there's a large plume of black smoke that comes out of the stack as the lights are flickering on and off that may indicate a fire in the engine spaces that would then sever control lines that would make the ship basically unsteerable. That has actually happened in Tampa Bay in recent years. And in those cases, the pilot aboard was able to steer the vessel out of the ship channel and intentionally run it aground on soft, muddy, sandy bottom to keep it from threatening to hit the bridge. A lot less damage to a ship running aground on a sandy bottom than striking those big rock piles around the new Sunshine Skyway Bridge.
So we're looking right now at the video of the collapse taking place. You mentioned electrical challenges. How common are challenges of that nature on a large-sized ship like this? Again, I would assume there are redundancies in place to ensure that even if power goes out, there is some way to remedy the issue. But again, something clearly has to go wrong in a major way in order for something like this to take place.
Right, and I was drawn to the fact that the lights go off, then they come back on briefly, then go off again. Yes, they're typically emergency backup generators. So if the main power goes down, they can fire up backup generators. That might have been what was going on during that brief uh, darkening or the lights going out on the vessel. But again, if it was a major fire in an engine space, ultimately that's going to fail. The power lines are going to burn through, the control lines and communication lines are going to burn through, especially if that fire goes up the stack where a lot of the wiring and control lines are located. That's one of the worst possible scenarios on any vessel at sea is a large fire, particularly in the engine room or in the engine spaces.
So I want to pull up video from the NTSB. They had a drone that they have been flying over the water. You know, this scene is so massive, and the hardware involved with cleaning up something of this nature, I would imagine, is massive. So I know you're an expert in how wind, fog, water conditions can affect ships in these kinds of harbors. What kind of challenges are those conditions going to present to people who are actually cleaning up this mess?
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a huge problem because there's a lot of twisted steel blocking the main ship channel. And last time I checked, there were about 60 vessels inside the bridge up in Baltimore Harbor. A large portion of those are large commercial vessels that will not be able to get out until all of this debris is removed from the channel. They're going to have to bring large heavy lift crane vessels or crane barges in. You know, those can cost $50,000-$60,000 a day to operate. You're going to have special commercial divers that know how to work in these dangerous conditions. I would suspect that the visibility is extremely low. They're going to basically have to braille their way around all of that wreckage, and again, avoiding getting entangled in all of the twisted steel that is likely there, and then attach cables to all of that or cut it up into smaller pieces so that it can be hoisted out and moved away. But until then, the entire port's essentially shut down.
Have we ever seen an operation like this before? You know, All right, we do want to apologize to our viewers. We had some technical issues on our end. We are going to continue on with our live programming and our coverage of the Baltimore bridge collapse. Our latest interview was with an expert discussing what the NTSB had to say about the ship today. We heard a lot of details about what they are going to eventually investigate, very preliminary information released to the public at this point. Nonetheless, we are going to get the latest discussing this with an expert from Virginia Tech. Let's play this out. Welcome back into Live Now from Fox. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's continue on with our coverage of the Baltimore bridge collapse. We heard some additional details from the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, giving us a little bit of insight into what they've learned so far about the cargo ship involved in this devastating crash. To help us break that down, we bring in Stefano Brizzolara. He's a professor and a Crofton Faculty Fellow at Virginia Tech. He also has a PhD in naval architecture. Stefano, good to see you. I just first want to read a little bit of what the NTSB said in their press conference this evening. They said that the boat, and I should say the cargo ship to be more specific, the cargo ship in this scenario was indicating that they needed help. The very first indication that they needed help came in the form of them radioing that they were requesting for tugboats. Why might they request tugboats in a situation like this?
Yes, because they probably realized they had a complete blackout on board, so they lost the power on the main propulsion, and they also lost the power on the steering gear of the rudder, so they could not maneuver by any means. And in that case, if you already have a tug engaged and let's say assisting your ship, then the tug can promptly intervene and steer or stop the ship. One or more tugs. For a ship this size, typically you want to use at least 3, if not 4 tugs, 2 at the stern and 2 at the bow. They had none, so yes, as they realized they lost complete power on propulsion system and steering gear, they tried to hold tugs, yes, but it's unfortunately too late at that point.
So I want to bring up the map of where this took place. So it obviously, you can see the red line on your screen there, and I'll bring it up in full so that we can see it big. When we look at this picture here, would you expect tugboats to have been with this ship at this point in its route?
Yes, probably, yes. You probably want, the tug will assist you to leave the quay at the beginning, then they will stay with the ship until the ship clears all the major obstacles, and for sure the bridge is a major obstacle.
So given that, does it surprise you that there were no tugs already with the ship at the time of the collision? Of course, there's still a lot to be learned about the situation, but we're working in the realm of speculation to a degree here. Does it surprise you that the ship didn't have tugboats with it at the time?
Yeah, on one side, yes. On the other side, there's a trend going on since quite a long time to save money on tug assistance, and that unfortunately is inconvenient in this kind of fatalities.
When we talk about, and this is something that's been reported on extensively, the NTSB today said that they have not been able to investigate the fuel situation on board yet. There have been reports discussing dirty fuel on cargo ships. I want to ask you, what is dirty fuel from a surface level perspective? What are we talking about when we say dirty fuel?
Yeah, I mean, these ships, I don't know exactly the exact particulars of the ship, so I don't know the characteristics of the main engine, but typically they have a main engine that can burn a lower grade of, let's say, diesel fuel, close to less refined oil. And it can happen that the quality of the fuel is not consistent with what the engine can tolerate, so the engine will shut down. Now, if this has happened or not, I don't think we can say yet. Maybe another type of failure regarding the electrical system on board. I've seen they lost power once, and then they probably tried to start the emergency diesel generators, and they lost power again at that point. So it may be that an electrical problem too.
So would that be your number one suspect at this point? Again, this is in the realm of we have not heard what the NTSB's conclusion is regarding how this ship lost complete power. But when you yourself, an expert in the field, see a ship of this magnitude completely getting put offline, do you suspect that it was some sort of issue like you were just discussing, or could there be a litany of reasons why it was in the shape it was in?
There can be various reasons, even mistaken in connecting the different diesel generators in parallel. There are certain procedures you have to follow. If you make a mistake, the electrical system on board will fail. So there can be different reasons.
We heard during
even when you activate the emergency diesel generators, the procedure to run them up has to be tested frequently and has to be followed carefully. So even that procedure is not easy. May not be easy for.
During the NTSB's briefing this evening, they kept mentioning VDR, the vessel data recorder. Can you tell me what a VDR is, and is it comparable to what many of us hear about in the airline industry, the black box?
It is. It's the voyage data recorder. It records data from any kind of sensor that is mounted on board, on main propulsion, auxiliary propulsion, steering gear, other kind of sensors, the fuel level, any sensor and sound that the ship has on board, communication and everything else. The data are compressed and stored in this single device, and then it can be decompressed and analyzed later on. So yes, from this data, it will be probably clearer what happened on board. Although